Hello and welcome back. My name is Kimberly Carey and I am the owner of So Sassy Stitcher in Northwest Arkansas. I am working on the Riley Blake bench pillow of the month, Falling for You. So it is the leaves with the one pumpkin that we just got in the mail. So this has been trying, and maybe because I'm trying to multitask and do too many projects, I don't know. Things haven't gone quite like they should, but we just fix it and roll with it. So I'm going to tell you what mistakes I made, and I will help you to fix them. So I, of course, changed things up a little bit. I cut things differently. I will walk you through that. You can kind of see all my chicken scratch here. So when I was looking at this pattern and I was looking at the leaves, so if you look at the center of the leaf here, it looks like a quarter square triangle block, okay? They actually have it in flying geese. So I don't like that for two reasons. Number one, the flying geese, I like to do a different method that makes them square better. And so this, because there's only two for each color, doesn't really make sense to do it that way, the Eleanor Burns method. Also, it creates a lot of extra seams that you don't really need. Okay, not a lot. It creates this extra seam right here that you don't really need. It just has a lot of bulk to it. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna do a quarter square triangle. Okay, it is the exact same thing, except I don't have this seam here, so it's gonna square up better, all that. Now, the traditional way of making quarter square triangle blocks is you would end up with two identical blocks, okay? But we only need one of each color, so I came up with an alternative. And I'm gonna share that with you when we do the cutting directions. So when I cut the white, okay, I cut a 5-inch width of fabric instead of a 4.5 inch. This is a little silly to me. They have you cut a 4.5 inch strip and you cut one 4.5 by 5 inch rectangle, and then you don't do anything else with the rest of that fabric. Seems a little silly to me. So I cut a 5-inch, cut a 4.5 inch rectangle from that, and then I used the 5-inch, and there's a bunch of 2.5 inch stuff. So you can split that 5-inch piece in half and cut the rest of this, okay? This one is a 5-inch, so you can just cut 2.5 inch rectangles off of that without doing anything. So I did all the 5-inch stuff that I could with that. Then I split the rest of it and used it for the 2.5 inch. And I was able to get pretty much everything out of that 5-inch strip, okay? I think I did have to cut one 2.5 inch strip to finish it out. I did get a lot of this 1.5 inch stuff out of the 5-inch strip. Just work through it and see what you can get out of it. I like to utilize my fabric. I ended up with a lot of white left over, okay? They could have given me a lot less and it would have been fine. I mean, I could have cut, this is how much I have left over. I have, let's see, 12 inches left over from what they gave me, because I actually utilized all of my fabric instead of just cutting a 4.5 inch width strip, cutting one 5-inch piece out of it, and then having 35 inches left and not doing anything with it. So I like to utilize my pieces a little bit more than that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, for the chocolate shabby, I did change things up a little bit. You're gonna cut your 2.5 inch strips for the binding. And then C2, I did 1.5 or 2 by 1.5. And I'll tell you why in just a little bit. And then I did do the 1.25 by 1 inch rectangles. So the C2 is the only thing I changed, and I upped it by 1/2 inch each dimension. So 2 by 1.5. And that is because I'm doing little teeny tiny flying geese. And I know doing flying geese the regular way, like I talked about, they're gonna get a little wonky. So by oversizing it, then I get to trim it down to the size I need. And when they're that small, things already get wonky pretty easily. So I'm just helping myself out there. Okay, now on to our quarter square triangles. So we have the 3 different shades of leaves, and they've got 2 colors within each one. So I'm changing 6 different colored instructions. The 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangle, it says to cut 3 of them. I cut, you actually need 1 of those, okay? And then I cut a 3.5 inch square. Do not cut a 3.5 inch square, okay? You're gonna cut a 4 inch square, and I'll explain why in a minute. So instead of cutting this 2.5 inch with the fabric, I cut 4. They give that to you, okay? It's like 4.5 inches. So you should be able to get a 4 inch strip out of this. And then again, I'm just gonna cut this down as I need to get the rest of this. So you're gonna cut 1 2.5 inch by 4.5 inch rectangle, and then I'm gonna cut 1 4 inch square. And that's gonna get me what I need for the quarter square triangles. If you wanna do it this way, you don't have to. If you wanna do flying geese, that's totally fine. I would oversize it a little bit. I might make it like a 2 3/4 by 4 3/4, something like that, to oversize it a little bit so that you can then square it up to the size that you need it, okay? Because those wings like to get a little wonky on us. So if you don't want to do this quarter square triangle method, that's totally fine, but I would oversize it so you can trim it up. Okay, and then on the H4, instead of 1 inch squares, I went with 1.5 inch squares. Again, those are for the flying geese on the stem of the leaf. And so I'm oversizing that to be able to trim it up. So for all of these colors that are for the flower or the leaves, I'm gonna do the same thing. 4 inch with the fabric and then trim it down, making 1 rectangle or I guess they have 2 rectangles, but then I'm gonna do 1 instead of the 4 2.5 inch squares. I'm gonna make 1 4 inch square here, and then I've still got 6 of the BD for the border, okay? And then same here, I'm gonna do 4 inch 4 inch 4 inch 4 inch, okay, strips, so that I am taking out the 2.5 inch square, and I am doing the or the 4 2.5 inch squares. I'm doing 1 4 inch square. Okay, same here. The 4 2.5 inch, I'm doing 1 4 inch instead. It really decreases the waste that you have on your fabric too. It utilizes the fabric more appropriately. So then again, here on the barn red, I'm doing 1 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangle and 1 4 inch. And then on the 1 inch square, I'm making that a 1.5 inch square. And then there's one of the green ones too. Yeah. So the green bee, I'm doing a 1.5 inch square as well. And again, those are for those little teeny tiny flying geese. The butterscotch bee, I'm doing a 4 inch instead of the 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. I'm only doing 1 of those. And again, instead of 1 inch squares, I'm making 1.5 inch squares. Okay, so I hope all that makes sense. I did 4 inch squares instead of doing the flying geese. So anywhere where it's part of the flying geese for the leaves, I did 4-inch square, or should have done 4-inch squares. I actually did 3.5-inch squares because evidently I can't do math. So I took those 4-inch squares and I cut them in half on the diagonal. Okay. So then, let me show you. So I cut them in half on the diagonal. All right. I thought this was going to give me extra, but of course I forgot to account for my seam allowance. Yes, I did. So I thought I had them oversized for what I was going to get. I'm a dork, didn't do it. So you cut them in half like this. Okay. So remember, this is going to be a bias edge. So you want to make sure that you don't pull and stretch this. Then you're going to take and you're going to stitch along the non-bias edge side, and they're going to be, you're going to sew them the same, iron them the same direction. Okay. Then you can put these together like this. Okay. Making sure when you do the seams to the same fabric, then you're going to have these nice little nested seams. Okay. Doesn't show up too well on here because when I did 1/4 inch seams, guess what? It was too small by 1/4 inch. So I was hoping to be able to trim these down. That obviously didn't happen. So I went to an 1/8 of an inch seam and I got it to 4.5. Okay. So I was not able to trim these up, but thankfully they went just fine. If you don't like working with the bias edge on the outside like this is probably not the way to do it for you. Again, I just didn't want to do the flying geese. They're not my favorite thing. They don't turn out the greatest when I can't do the Eleanor Burns method. I just get frustrated with them. So I came up with an alternative. Now, ideally, when you do these, this is not your bias edge because you trim them up the way that you cut them. You make 2 of these so that your bias edges are on the inside, not on the outside. So again, if that doesn't work for you, be my guest, do it a different way. But this is the way that I chose to do them. Okay. So I will stitch along here, fold it open, and you get a pretty 1/4 square triangle. Like, it works just fine. I just cut them too small. So that's why you're doing 4-inch instead of 3.5 like I did. You should have the fabric to be able to do that. Okay. Now, the next thing that I did is when I cut the 3.5 inch strips, they do a lot of 1/4 inch stuff in here instead of on the half. I forgot to trim these guys down, so I put my little triangles on them, and then I went to put the next piece on, and oh, guess what? It doesn't fit. These are too wide. So I had to take one triangle off, trim it up, move my triangle. You can kind of see that right there. Okay, I moved my triangle, put them back on so that I could put that together. For these guys, so this is part of the leaf. You can see here that we're doing the stitch and flip, but for whatever reason, silly reason, it has instructions to iron to the darker color, which I get, right? You don't want that shadowing. However, if you iron one the opposite direction, when you go to put these together, you're gonna get that snuggle seam in there. It's gonna alleviate the bulk in this corner, and it matches up. You can get your peak to match up perfectly. Okay. So iron one the other way. And I forgot to do that when I put them or ironed them the first time. So before I sewed them together, I just went back and ironed one the opposite direction, and it works just fine. Okay. So just be really mindful, because there's lots of different sizing on these, that you are watching which size you're cutting, and be willing to adjust if necessary. I mean, it's kind of one of those things that, you know, if I hadn't been doing 10 other things, I might have caught it. And we just get in a hurry and do those things. For the border pieces, where's my pieces? I just followed the pictures in the booklet and just did them like that. And you can see I've got kind of a chain stitch here, and then I am ironing to the color piece instead of the white so that we don't get that shadowing. And then we'll just keep stitching all those together. For the border, I tend to kind of do all the pieces and then put, you know, all the little pieces and then start putting it together. I don't put together just the pumpkin and then move on to the leaf, which maybe is part of my problem. But I like to try to be more efficient. Does it work all the time? I don't know. When I make mistakes, but we all make mistakes no matter how we do it. So these are our little flying geese. Okay, so you can see I have oversized this. So right now it's 2 by 1.5. And if we look at how small this needs to be, it needs to be 1.5 by like an inch. Okay, so I'm going to trim a lot off of this, but that's going to allow me to have this not be wonky. Okay, and when I do this, I can use my flying geese ruler to be able to get that point just right. Even though I'm not doing the size that my flying geese ruler is. I mean, I have a pretty small one. I don't have a teeny tiny one. This is a 1.5 by 3 finished size flying geese. But when I put this on here, okay, so you can see that it follows that just perfectly, but then I can trim up this top line and get my good 1/4 inch that I need at the top. I need a new blade. This blade's getting very dull. But then that gives me my 1/4 inch at the top. And then I can take a regular ruler and center it down the middle. I can also use maybe, but I can line up this edge, and then if I know it needs to be 1.5, I'm going to put that 3/4 mark on in that middle and line up lines on the edge. Okay, it's not ideal, but it can be done. So then I can trim up this side, and then I can turn it around once I have that side done and just do my 1.5 by 2 inches from that point. Okay, and trim the rest of it up. So that's how I'm gonna do those little teeny tiny flying geese. There are lots of little teeny tiny pieces in this one. I'm kind of getting tired of little teeny tiny pieces on these, but in order to put a lot in a small space, that's what needs to happen. I hope this helps you learn from my mistakes. Okay, we all make mistakes in quilting. I'm going to be upfront and honest with you about that. I am not perfect. I make mistakes. I hope that I can help you from frustration and heartache when that happens, and be able to have a successful project. So I hope it goes well for you. Happy quilting, and we'll see you again soon.